Okay, moving right along. Next on our agenda is the state superintendent's report.
Okay, I am going to, that sort of works. I'm on my phone, so I apologize. We have great tech support here at work, but we have an internet issue in my office, so I apologize. One of the things that you have been interested in as a board, I guess I should introduce myself for the public, Sydney Dixon, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. I know that as a board, you have really been interested, supportive of, and worrying about our students during the pandemic. And I appreciate board members who have asked that we really focus on giving you updates around COVID-19. As we've looked at various student groups and how they're responding to services in schools, one of the groups that we've been very concerned about are our students who are members of families who work in situations where we classify them as migrants. So we want to talk to you today about our migrant education program. So first we want to define that for you so we have a consistent definition. So I'm not sure who's driving, one of the Jeffs. Jeff Ojeda will really do the heavy lifting, and he has been such a great advocate for our students, particularly those who are part of a migrant population, and really leads this program. So I'm going to have him do most of the presentation, but let's talk about what the goal of our migrant education program is. So you can see on your screen that it's to ensure that all migrant students reach challenging academic standards and graduate with a high school diploma or completed GED that then prepares them for responsible citizenship, further learning, meaning that we want to make sure that they have access to post-secondary opportunities and that they have productive employment. So given that program goal, we want to share with you some of the opportunities that our students have, how we're mitigating issues in the pandemic, what some of the concerns are, and a little bit of data. So next slide. So let's talk about how we define our students in a migrant category. And basically they're involved in agriculture and fishing. And though our economy continues to change and some of our smaller communities are moving away from agriculture, we still have quite a vibrant agriculture industry in our state. So they travel, of course, following the growth season of the crops and the livestock, often dependent on Mother Nature as well. And they require additional supports because of this mobility that they have to ensure that they have access to our school programs and academics. And of course, that leaves us with greater literacy and mathematics skills challenges. So for example, many of our students have families, parents who do not speak English as their primary language and may speak very little to no English at all. And with the mobility and in and out of communities, that exacerbates some of these academic challenges. So with that, I'm going to turn time over to Jeff Ojeda, who directs our migrant program. And I'll just let him explain to you, and then we'll stop for Q&A at the end of the deck. So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you.
And Jeff, if you'll reintroduce yourself, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I am Jeff Ojeda. I am the.
We might need you.
Jeff, your mic is really, if you could just lean in, maybe.
Oh, sure.
We can't hear you.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
All right.
It's
so
better.
I'm Jeff Ojeda.
I'm the one. I think I'm the only one with hearing devices, and I got them cranked up, and I barely have you. Others here, Jeff, okay? Okay.
No, he's very soft.
Okay, please continue.
All right. So good morning. My name is Jeff Ojeda, and I am the McKinney-Vento and Migrant Education Specialist at the State Board of Education. So thank you very much, Superintendent Dixon, for the time to be able to talk about our migrant population. It is a small group within our state, but it is an important group nonetheless. So our groups have had considerable challenges because of COVID, and that's been exacerbated to an extreme because of the situations that have come up because of workplaces closing, because of services not being available, and internet connectivity, as you heard earlier in our meeting today, is a considerable issue that needs to be addressed and oftentimes does get addressed. However, in rural communities and in places where a lot of farming, a lot of open space, sometimes that's not available. And so our school districts have done and created opportunities for those students, but that also means that they've had additional challenges as well. So for instance, many of the families that we're speaking of are low-income families with not a lot of technology experience. And so they often need support, not in terms of getting online, but once they're online, to be able to know how to use the services that are being required of them from districts. So it's been a challenge for them to be able to continually stay on top of that when technology isn't something that comes to them very readily or very easily. We do have migrant recruiters who go to our LEAs and meet with our families and know our families well. And they have done and attempted to minimize the effects of those kinds of issues. But it's a small number of people. Usually in a district, it's just one person who's meeting with all of these families to try to give them support. And if you're having to do that on a daily basis, and not only that, but now you have geographic locations that you need to be at to be able to give that support, the day goes by very, very fast. And so they don't have as much time in the day as we all would like in order to be able to get everything that we need done. So that's been a challenge for our families as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So when, back in March, when the pandemic kind of hit hard in the United States and things began closing down, there was a big fear of people being infected. Our migrant workers do need to work in order to make a living and get a paycheck, and they don't have the luxury of being able to work from home. So while many of us were able to do that, chickens were still laying eggs and cattle still needed to be moved, and all of those things still needed to happen. But those places, like others, closed for a while, and so there was no income for those families. So that became an issue for them. And then when they were told to come back, they were eager to come back to work because they obviously needed that income. However, they did not have the care that some of our how do I say it, important people working in, say, the medical field had. So while certain pockets of people working that were called back to work were given, excuse me, were given masks and were told to stay 6 feet apart, in many cases for our families going back, they didn't have those kinds of securities in place. So they did go back to work because they needed the income, but then got sick and so had to stay out of work again. And again, if you're not working, you're not getting paid. And so that caused huge issues in finances and being able to pay rent as well as bills. And a lot of people are struggling or were struggling because of that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, as an example, we have many families that work in eggplants or turkey plants here in the state. You know, that the eggs kept hatching or chickens kept laying eggs, and those eggs needed to be picked up because we all needed to get to the market to be able to buy them. And again, the securities in place for them, the health securities weren't in place for them. And so a lot of people got sick. They weren't considered essential workers, but their work was considered essential. That is, it needed to continue to happen, but they didn't have the care that many of our other fields that were asked to continue working as essential had. So they met with a lot of difficulties and a lot of hardships in that way. They worked in unsafe conditions and continue to do so because of that. Next slide, please. So I have some data for you so that you can see. Again, the migrant program is very small within our state. However, it does cover our entire state, and it does include the following groups of kids that we're going to look at now. So next slide. So in the 18-19 year, we had a total of 670 students. That's the year previous to last year. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that there was a significant increase in our migrant population. Now that, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. I have them here for you by district so that you can see. That increase, however, I need to point out that the migrant program is a volunteer program. That is, families decide whether they want to participate in it or not. Our migrant recruiters, is what we call them from our districts, go out into the field and look for these families and try to enroll them in this program in order for them to be able to get a specific services that will help their kids academically through school. And the increase here is attributed to the need to be able to get supports for their students in ways that they were previously getting at a school site without necessarily being a part of the program. So we see a pretty big increase here, and we see that that will continue to increase in the near future because of what's going on. Next slide. Here I show you the number of students by grade level and the numbers of students, the grade span or age span that we look at. We do see from age 3 all the way through to graduated, and even in some cases as adults. And this is in order to be able to ensure that these students, wherever they are in the United States, are able to continue on in their education. So next slide. Thank you. So previously you had the 18-19 year, and this is the 19-20 year. You can see that there is an increase in at every grade level. That we see the significant increases in 3rd, 4th, and 9th grades there. Next slide. Thank you. So these are students who received services again. For the 18-19 year, I'm sorry, that seems to be a copy of the slide that we had previously. Next one. Thank you. So this is the 19-20 year for those numbers. I don't know why those seem to be repeated. Let's go to the next one. Thank you. So in terms of services that were provided for the 18-19 year, you can see that the largest form of help and support that our students are getting are through reading and math. We do also work through high school credit accrual, as well as any additional support. We try to keep track of that. We also look at counseling and any referred service that happens out into the community for these families as well. If we can go to the next slide, which would be last year's numbers, you can see I'm sorry, for some reason it's the same slide, but there was an increase overall. So what we find is that there is almost a 300 student count increase for the reading and math. Our counseling also goes up considerably from the 4 that you see there in the 18-19 year. In the 19 and 20 year, it was something, if I remember right, about 37 counseling referrals, and our referrals out of education and into community service was also greatly increased. So we see all of our numbers increasing. Yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as part of the work that we do in migrant education as a state, Utah is the lead state in a small consortium. It's a consortium of 12 states that came together several years ago and created what is called migrantliteracy.net. And that site is a website where teachers and students have access, online access, to tutorials and skill building assignments that can be assigned by the teacher, as well as once a tutorial has been assigned, the student works through that, and then the system automatically gives them increasing skill building activities to continue in their growth and development. And it doesn't just stay with one content area, but it goes through several different types of skills to increase literacy and math skills for our students. Next slide, please. So Utah is a part of this consortium, and the consortium began, this past consortium that ended, began in the 2015 year and ended in 2020. Utah is the lead state again in a similar consortium with the majority of similar states. The only inclusion now is Minnesota as part of the group. That is now adding a parent portal for migrantliteracy.net in order for parents to be able to participate in supporting their students at home in education. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as part of literacy, you can see these are some of the topics that have been used considerably. We have seen a huge increase in the use of migrantliteracy.net through this year. So we already have more uses from August until the end of January in this year than we saw in the entire year previous. So while our families are needing supports, they are also getting it and seeking it and using it when it's available to them. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the tutorials also are available in Spanish, all of them. So whether we're talking literacy or talking mathematics, all of those are available in both English and Spanish. And we know that we have additional languages in our migrant population, not just in this state, but throughout the United States. However, the majority of our families, I would say something like 85%, are Spanish speaking if they are native to other languages. Migrant, by definition, migrant does not mean that they are English language learners. We have many migrant families that are Native American, that is, they're born and raised here and have been for generations, and speak only English. So being an immigrant is not a requirement under the definition for being migrant. As Superintendent Dixon stated earlier, being migrant is specific to having to travel with families throughout the year in crops and agriculture. Primarily agriculture for us here, but we also have dairy farms, turkey farms that also require the use that fit that definition as well. Next slide. I am open to any questions that you may have. I'm sorry the sound is a little low. I apologize. Hopefully I've spoken loud enough for all of you to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. I heard you just fine, so thank you. Questions or comments from board members? And this is part of the superintendent's report, so if the superintendent wants to weigh in, I'm not seeing any hands raised, but that's good information. Board member Moss.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question, given the core definition of being migrant, I take it this may be somewhat of a back and forth or sometimes transitory group. How do you help, and I'm sorry if this was woven in there and I didn't catch the specific part of it, but there's connectivity and then there's also hardware and devices, right? How do you help these kids have access to devices? What have been the challenges or successes in giving them stability and that kind of access?
That's a great question, Board Member Moss. So thank you for that. Our districts and our schools, our LEAs, whether they're charter schools or districts, they've been phenomenal at trying to reach out to our kids, and I can't stress that enough. And you heard in our earlier presentation today from one of our LEAs just what kind of work they're doing in order to allow students to be able to have access to school. And that's the first thing, right? If you have kids, particularly in migrant, that are mobile, by definition, they're traveling. Many of them are moving either districts or moving states 2 to 4 times, excuse me, for the most part, on a yearly basis. There's a lot of change for students there. And so our districts are doing great. They have created everything from mobile hotspots, that is, they've put hotspots in buses and have those buses being transported out to locations, not with kids, but just for families to come to that area to be able to log in. But again, once they log in there and are able to get online, then the question is, can and do they know how to use the technology in order to be able to function as the student is being expected to? And sometimes the family just simply doesn't have enough experience on their own to be able to do that. They don't have the amount of use of technology that we are fortunate to have. So oftentimes that same bus driver becomes the tech support for those families as they kind of go around. They've been districts and charters have been great at giving devices to families, whether those be Chromebooks or laptops, or in some cases even mobile devices, where that becomes available to them so that they can actually log in and do the work that's being asked of them. That part hasn't been an issue at all. There have been some exchanges because a device breaks or doesn't work. And sometimes it's taken a while to get an exchange, or that's been returned, but they're waiting to get something back. And in the meantime, they don't have a device to be able to use. So while the logistics are being sought out and taken care of, it's those hard to think of little things that keep us from being able to function and being able to support a family trying to get on and use the devices. That's been a real challenge. So as an example, when sometimes here working from home, I have issues with the internet, and I've been on a computer for a long time, so I kind of know what to do, but I'm by no means a tech person. I just do what I think I can, and usually I can get it to function. But families that don't have that experience don't know what to do. They don't know what kind of menus to search for, or where to go to find the network to be able to log on, and those kinds of things. So if that becomes an issue, then our migrant recruiters are being called constantly by our families to be able to give them some kind of support. But they're not tech people either, right? So they're not IT people. So you can see that one simple problem could keep a family from logging on or being available online, or student from being in class, because they can't figure it out. And it just takes time to be able to do that and be able to get in contact with someone who can help them and support them. So those small challenges that we kind of look at and say they're kind of small issues, but we can kind of deal with it. For many of our migrant families, those are huge obstacles that they don't know how to overcome on their own. And so the real challenge then is giving them that kind of support in order to be able to be actively engaged. And we have kids that are enrolled in school for a little while, and then the family gets scared or gets sick, and so they have to stay home. And then they're kind of coming back and forth as well. And so there are a ton of challenges, I think, that were difficult to foresee because we've never had to use technology on such a large scale, and expect all of our kids to be able to kind of function in that way if for some reason they're not able to be at school. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Superintendent.
I'll just close out by publicly thanking Mr. Ojeda for his great work with our students. And, it's a small end size, as he mentioned, but every student matters. And we haven't really talked much about students who belong to families who are migrant workers. And I just think it's so important to put it on your radar, and very grateful for all of the districts and charters who are making extra effort to make sure that their families' needs are met, and especially educating these students well. You'll notice that Jeff's his device is on top of a piano. We have many talented employees outside of what they do in work. So I'm wondering if Jeff could play us into your next agenda item, which is the general consent calendar. Maybe that would be a good segue with a few bars of music, sir.
Sure.
Is he taking requests like Swans on the Lake or?
I'll just give you some fade over music.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Superintendent.